5 years ago, 346 people were killed in two plane crashes that happened 5 months apart in Indonesia and Ethiopia. Both planes were Boeing 737 MAX 8s.
All right, new video of an engine cover that fell off a Boeing 737 operated by Southwest Airlines during takeoff.
It has photographic evidence. It was not properly bolted in place when that plane left the Boeing factory.
United Airlines now says that it's found loose bolts during inspections of its 737 MAX 9 fleet.
There are certain types of criminal acts that can be brought at any time, or there's an extension. There's ways to extend the time. The one that always comes up that is there's no time limitation for it. That's murder. Greetings, viewers. This is Dave Epstein. I'm from Post Pollock, law firm here in Roseland, New Jersey. I'm here again to talk about things legal. There have been a series of incidents, more recently with troubling events involving Boeing planes. They just scrubbed the latest Starliner shuttle mission. But it's kind of embarrassing for Boeing, which is trying to show itself as a leader in all aspects of aeronautics, aviation, and now this. But there was news about a week ago that was, I shouldn't say that, it's mid-May, I'd say, that was even more troubling. And that was that the United States attorney down in the United States District Court in the Northern District of Texas reported to a judge in a case that had been filed many years earlier, and we'll get to that Boeing was not complying with something called a deferred prosecution agreement. And let me back up now. I threw that out there. You're wondering, what in the world is that? I'll give you the quick answer on that. It's an agreement whereby a prosecutor is thinking about bringing criminal actions against a company or principals of a company, and it agrees with that company to hold off on that if the company will do something right or fix something. And I think you're already, if you've been following even vaguely the Boeing story, you're already getting what they were supposed to be doing. But I'm going to take you back even further in time because people have been trying over and over again what happened with Boeing. I've heard people attribute it to when they merged with McDonnell Douglas, it was different management philosophies and it wasn't focused on quality control. I can't tell you that. I don't know. I can say this, there have been increasing problems. Where I do, I always seem to find some fault or some problem in the area of regulation, and that leads up to where we are now. Starting in 2009, Boeing, which again is one of the leading aircraft manufacturers in the world, and it had some problems, got somehow through lobbying or some sort of legal maneuvering, convinced the FAA that the FAA didn't need to inspect its planes because Boeing would do that for them. When I mention the FAA, folks, that means the Federal Aviation Administration. You want to make sure your planes are safe. You want to make sure somebody's overseeing what's going on. That's the FAA. And we need to count on them. We also need to count on the National Transportation Safety Bureau, which likewise, the NTSB, which likewise monitors these activities. The NTSB, I think, is more active when there's a crash or an incident. And Boeing has had its share of those. Now, more recently, so Boeing was left to regulate itself. Previously, many moons ago, Boeing had been a poster child, the golden child of quality control, engineering. It really was. And over the last few decades, that started to change. There have been all kinds of claims made by company workers, unions, whistleblowers, the government, lawsuits, so on and so forth, about how it's slipping. Well, what happens in the airline industry is if you're having quality control problems, if you're having whatever they are, engineering problems, just people are not being attentive enough on the manufacturing line, you start to see them sometimes in spectacular and catastrophic ways. And that's what began happening. There were mishaps. There were air mishaps. The one I remember more recently was that there was an Air Alaska plane that took off, and during takeoff, the door flew off. Now, they're lucky that it happened during takeoff. If you know anything about pressurization or depressurization, if you're up at 10, 20,000 feet where the oxygen is thin and the door flies off, you've got a problem on your hands. And I've heard various differing explanations of how this happened. They recently found planes with bolts missing. I mean, that's something that is just manufacturing 101. I mean, these are things that should not be happening. Now, so over time, after Boeing took however long it was, or spent however long it was, monitoring itself, keeping itself in check, keeping itself honest, and it sounds to me like you had the fox guarding the hen house, enough incidents happened, enough allegations were being made that finally the government had to step in. So in 2021, the Justice Department, there were suits brought that said that they were violating quality control standards, all sorts of things were being done or not being done, and there was a lawsuit brought. They were actually contemplating, they may have actually filed criminal charges. So in January 2021, I think it was January 7th, 2021, Boeing and the United States government, the United States Attorney's Office, who was about to prosecute them, entered into that agreement, the agreement whereby they would not go after them, meaning the Justice Department, as long as those people, Boeing, made sure that quality control and compliance with the law. I mean, there were many, many facets where they found problems all over the place. And they said, comply with the law. There were more detailed items in that agreement. I mean, you can look at it. You can find it online. It was entered in the Northern District of Texas. And it was, as far as anyone was concerned, it was a good move. Rather than prosecuting people criminally for failing to really make sure that these planes were carefully put together and properly inspected, they allowed them what we used to call in touch football or sandlot football a do-over. So Boeing gets its do-over, and Boeing is, let's just say, boneheaded about it because the problems have continued. I mean, you can find it all over the internet about the timelines. But if you look at the timeline that occurred, starting just this year with a door coming off, in January, the airlines who are buying these Boeing planes, and it's mostly the 737. I think it's a 737 MAX. At one point, they were all grounded in the past year. Bolts are being found off, things like that. It's just a bad thing to have in the air. So they grounded them. The United States, the Federal Aviation Administration, in January said they were going to audit Boeing. In other words, they were going to go in and see if they are, in fact, fixing things, fixing themselves. If Boeing was fixing itself. They found more with the audit, and there were also starting in this year, I believe it was January, February, March, there were whistleblowers coming forward, people who worked for Boeing who said this company doesn't care, or they're not fixing things as they find them. So they were supposedly working on it. Then the FAA cleared them. I believe that was in January of 2024. people were checking their planes. And this is an interesting thing in this day and age. I guess people don't trust airlines or airline manufacturers, and maybe the government that's supposed to be monitoring them. And one of the things that many travelers do now, I do, is check what kind of plane you're going to get on. If it's the Boeing 737 MAX, I'm probably going to look for a different flight because that's the plane that they're having the biggest problems with. But they've been having problems across the board. But that's the real problem. That was going to be like call it their Model T. Like every airline was going to use it, and that was the way it had worked in the past. Boeing would come out with a new plane, a new commercial aircraft, and everybody wanted to have it because they knew it was a good plane. Back in the old days, I don't know how far old is. I mean, when I was a kid, Boeing was the standard, the gold standard. So people are now checking to see what type of plane they're on. So in February, after people are already balking at this plane, there are shakeups in Boeing. There was, I think, the person who was in charge of the 737 MAX program, and again, that's the plane that's the problem child. He leaves. Then the FAA gives Boeing another 90 days to come up with a plan. And I believe the quotes by the FAA was they wanted to have a plan to address, quotes, systemic quality control issues to meet FAA's non-negotiable safety standards. Now, when I read that one, I said, so we have negotiable safety standards? As far as I'm concerned, and I don't think anybody's going to disagree with this opinion, I don't think it's a legal opinion, none of that should be negotiable. You should get on that plane knowing that every bit of engineering that has taken place, that has come to the human brain or to our society, to our human society, our world culture, has been placed in that plane that you're walking on with your elderly aunt and your kids. Maybe you're even traveling with your dog. You need to know that. But even the FAA was saying they're not doing that, the non-negotiable safety standards. Again, I understand sometimes there can be regulations that are very heavy and people say, oh, we need to deregulate. It's this dynamic. People saying we need to deregulate, it usually comes down to a matter of cost and inconvenience and cutting into the bottom line. But sometimes you get regulators who go overboard and say they want everything perfect where it's really not necessary. But I'll give the FAA the benefit of a doubt. By non-negotiable, they meant things like that mean the plane is going to fall out of the sky. Something's going to fly off the plane, like a door. So the FAA gave them time to comply. Then they report the results of their audit in March, and it just pounded Boeing. And Spirit, which was using Boeing planes, using, I guess, the 737, I'm not sure. Just what I see is manufacturing process control, parts handling and storage, and product control issues. So what ends up happening is that Boeing is put on the spot, and then the NTSB gets involved. Remember I mentioned them earlier. That's the National Transportation Safety Board, or Bureau, I think. And they said that Boeing wasn't sharing basic details. Now, again, I have to tell you, I know there's this tendency by larger companies or a lot of organizations, they don't want to jump over themselves sharing information before they've had a chance to vet it. It's like it or not, it's somewhat common in corporate America. I think people try in many instances to be forthright and to have full disclosure. But when you're on the hot seat like this, the last thing you want to be accused of is not sharing basic details. On May 14, 2024, Boeing has not complied with the DPA, as they call it, the Deferred Prosecution Agreement. Boeing was now being opened up to criminal liability because of its failure to comply with that DPA. So it's evolved to a point where these problems were noted. There were some issues that were happening even before 2021. There was the issue that for I don't know how many years, Boeing was supposed to be inspected by the FAA, and the FAA somehow allowed Boeing to inspect itself. And we know how that worked out. And now, fast forward to 2024, after the deferred prosecution agreement was put in place, and you would think that that would get people moving at Boeing, because if you don't comply with it, there are going to be criminal charges filed. Now, the U.S. attorney, the government will inform the court once it has decided on how to proceed, but no later than July 7, 2024. Pursuant to the court's January 2021 order, that is the date through which the computation of time in which a trial must be commenced has been excluded under the Speedy Trial Act. By that, they are talking about past violations that existed as of 2021 when they entered into that agreement. And what they're talking about, folks, is statutes of limitations. There were some screw-ups by Boeing that if you're going to bring criminal charges against them, you have to bring them within a certain amount of time. There are certain types of criminal acts that can be brought at any time, or there's ways to extend the time. The one that always comes up that is there's no time limitation for it, that's murder. And I will tell you, I don't know if they charge these executives or Boeing with murder. I don't know if you could, but it appears that due to safety flaws, there may have been people killed. They talked about the victims of the Lion Air Flight 610, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, which crashed, and the customers and the family members. I mean, there's so many cases where people died or were seriously injured that there's going to be people held to account. So I think we all have to wait until July 7, 2024 to see what the Justice Department is going to do. It doesn't seem to me that if the Justice Department is correct in assessing that they have not complied with this agreement, this golden opportunity, the do-over that they were given, that they should be prosecuted because people's lives are at risk. Safety, there is safety to be concerned with here, and it's the most fundamental kind of safety. I mean, you're up in the air 20,000 feet, and a door flies off. You've got a big problem on your hands. So what you need to do is lean on your senator, your congressperson, somebody to say, I want this to be fixed. And by that, I don't say you shouldn't want Boeing to go out of business, but what you should want is that Boeing and all airlines be held accountable. And I'm not just talking about lawsuits by families of victims. Yes, if you're in an airline crash or a relative is, same basic ideas with personal injury and a negligence lawsuit can be had depending on the circumstances. And that can include a claim against the airline if there was pilot error or there was an error with the control tower, or a manufacturing defect, which is what many of these lawsuits seem to be focused on with Boeing. All of these things are available, but I think what's more important from a legal standpoint is that the federal government get its act together and make sure that there are so-called boots on the ground to inspect these planes, and don't leave it to the people you are inspecting to do the inspecting. Straight up honest federal aviation employees should be looking at these planes, and they should be doing it with the utmost care because, listen, they fly those planes too. All of us do. We want to know we're safe. We want to know that when they put these planes together, they're doing it the way all these great engineers at Boeing over the years all these great engineers in the history of aviation had in mind when they invented all these parts in these planes and the aerodynamics, all the analysis. So, people, let's wait till July 7 and see what happens. But I hope what happens is either a prosecution goes forward or that there is some radical change in the way that these airlines, and this airline in particular, are monitored. Thank you. This is Dave Epstein signing off for Post Pollock. I hope to see everybody back, and please call us if you have any legal needs. Thank you.